Since the November 3rd election took place, Donald Trump has asserted he is the victor. And when the mainstream media called it for Joe Biden, Donald Trump refused. He challenged the results with several lawsuits. Now, these official suits in the Trump campaign are only a small portion of the lawsuits that have actually been filed that would have helped Donald Trump overturn the results and eventually win. But most of these suits, particularly the ones launched by the Trump campaign, were not heard. They were typically kicked out of the courts due to standing issues, injury, or procedural issues. When it comes to accusations of voter fraud, many judges have outright refused to see the evidence. But in the court of public opinion, those on the right, those who support Trump, have absolutely seen the evidence. And while I wouldn't say it's been adjudicated to the point where we can make a determination, Peter Navarro put out a report that Trump is citing, claiming that the results are definitive and there's more than enough evidence to say that the results have been overturned. This is the kind of thing that needs to make its way to a court. But when most courts are saying, due to standing, like I mentioned, we're not going to hear this, Trump supporters eventually meet their wits' end. And now Donald Trump is calling on his supporters to descend on Washington, D.C., January 6th, the day the Electoral College votes will be counted in a joint session by Congress. On that day, Trump says, show up for a protest. It's going to be wild. And based on what we've already seen from the previous events, I think Trump is absolutely correct. Now, will all of Trump's supporters actually show up? I'm not too sure, but this could be Trump's last stand. And it's a time when he has specifically called on his supporters to arrive in D.C. That's something that may actually be the big push Trump supporters need to say, this is it. It's now or never. I don't know if this will actually end up solving anything. But a call like this from Donald Trump, although it may be relatively passive, he did say be there. This could be a sign of the political willpower to stand up, take charge, and actually physically contest what's going on in this country. I don't know exactly what form that will take, but I can say Antifa obviously has been, well, not too subtle in their anger with the U.S. government over the past year or longer, going around setting fires, destroying buildings. They've attacked and targeted innocent people for a very long time. At the last event in D.C., the Proud Boys came out and they torched a Black Lives Matter banner. They went around beating up Antifa, and it looked very much like what you'd see in videos from Antifa. The only difference? Well, the Proud Boys weren't going around targeting innocent businesses and random people. Now, there are some accusations that they tore down a banner from a church and then burned it, though people on the right are arguing the banner actually had already been torn down before by Black Lives Matter, by Antifa, apparently because they felt it was corporatization or the church shouldn't actually be doing it. There's obviously going to be accusations on both sides and moral justification. So I'm not going to tell you whether it's right or wrong when both sides are engaging in what I could describe as mutual combat. I could only say this. It's not just the right that's reaching their wits' end. Watching the court say, no, we won't even hear the evidence in Nevada, in Georgia, seeing what they believe to be definitive evidence just get ignored. Well, these people are going to snap. The mainstream media obviously is saying it's all wrong. It's fake news. It's not true. And Trump is pushing it. But on the left, people are fed up with the lockdowns. Unfortunately, they're not fed up in the way that they probably should be, calling for an end to the lockdowns. They're angry the government isn't going to print them more money, or just, I don't know how they expect to give the people more money, but they're mad the stimulus checks aren't big enough. People are now in massive debt. On average, I believe one report says $6,000 in unpaid rent or mortgages on average, and 12 million people are facing eviction. It's obviously not the same kind of anger we see on the right, but the powder keg is there. The chemical mixture of an angry and outraged right wing and an angry and outraged left wing is sitting right before us. And Trump has said, my friends, it is time for a wild protest. There are already fears from the left that we are going to see widespread Trumpism violence. But let's read these stories and see exactly what's going on. Because I'll tell you, the one thing that's going to keep the establishment propped up, I can say, is that the left and the right, they won't get along with each other. So I think we might actually see some kind of three-way conflict. Establishment, the right, and the left. It's not just two factions. The right is clearly upset with the Democratic establishment, but so is the left. But the left and the right don't like each other either. So I think for the most part, the left and the right might be targeting the establishment and the political machine. And that will leave a weird space between the two where they probably won't be fighting, though they definitely won't be unifying. This is the big threat to the political establishment right now, coming from both fronts, left and right. We can only guess as to how it will play out. But let's get started with Trump's call for people to take physical action. Before we do, head over to timcast.com/donate. If you'd like to support my work, there are many ways you can give. Got a P.O. box. You want to send me some stuff. But the best thing you can do, obviously, share this video. This is the kind of stuff that I hope people are paying attention to, the kind of thing that'll actually impact your life. But when you turn on the big mainstream media news broadcast, they're talking about, the vaccine or whatever, and that's fine. But are they telling you what's actually happening on the ground near your home? Probably not. If you think I do a good job, it's rational and reasonable, then please share this video, smash the like button, subscribe, and let's get to the news. Fox News reports Trump promises wild protest in Washington, D.C. on January 6, claims it's impossible he lost. Trump's campaign has filed a number of unsuccessful lawsuits challenging the election results. They say, first, they highlight a tweet from Trump. Trump says, Peter Navarro releases 36-page report alleging election fraud, more than sufficient to swing victory to Trump. A great report by Peter. Statistically impossible to have lost the 2020 election. Big protest in D.C. on January 6. Be there. Will be wild. Now, I'm not going to sit here and pretend that Trump tweeting "be there, will be wild" is like this grand call to arms of Trump putting on golden armor and taking out a horn and saying, "The time has come, people, for a march to victory." And he's just tweeting, "Be there. It'll be wild." And it probably will be. Will it be more than we've seen? It may be. January 6th, it's not just about Trump saying "be there." January 6th is about the joint session of Congress where the Electoral College is going to count the votes. This is it, Trump supporters. For everything you've said, for everything you've claimed, January 6th is effectively the last day of this election. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not going to say that the battle or the war is anywhere near over. Already, we're hearing the next step in this saga will be Trump declaring himself a shadow president. Well, we've already heard accusations that Barack Obama was essentially doing that as it is. If on January 6th, the vote count comes in, and this is the extreme likelihood, like 99.999%, they're going to read it all for Joe Biden. Then Joe Biden will be officially confirmed by a joint session of Congress. The constitutional process will have completed for the election, and the inauguration will be on January 20th. If there was any claim to a legitimate constitutional challenge for Republicans, it is, for the most part, coming to an end on January 6th. Now, I say for the most part because between the 6th and the 20th, there still can be legal challenges. And obviously, the Supreme Court can make their decisions because we're human beings. We're not computer programs that follow this narrow path. The Constitution is that guideline, but, technically something could happen and things could change. But as far as the electoral process is concerned, this is the last day for the actual legal determination. On January 6th, if they say Biden takes it, then there's no argument. He took it. Now, maybe you could overturn after that in some capacity, like if health issues arise or Joe Biden can't be inaugurated, something interesting would happen. Trump is the next highest amount of votes. That wouldn't really matter because you got to get 270, which would result in a House contingent election. And obviously Trump would win. So the election may be ending on the 6th as far as the constitutional process is concerned. But clearly the war is not over. I want to make that clear for everybody because I want to be careful here. So Joe Biden's a very, very old man. Okay. And he was coughing up a storm the other day. We'll see how things play out. They go on to say January 6th is the day Congress will meet to accept the presidential election results. But Trump and his campaign have disputed the results and launched numerous legal challenges. Roughly 4 dozen lawsuits by the Trump campaign and allies to upend the election results over the past 6 weeks have been tossed out by state and federal judges. Here's the important part. Most of them were not by Trump, and the ones that were tossed out for procedural reasons. I warned about this. I said the Texas lawsuit should be picked up by the Supreme Court. And if they think it should not be ruled in favor of Trump, they should just say so. By throwing out a massive lawsuit with 126 House Republicans, with, I believe, a total of 20 states on the Republican side, 20 states on the Democrat side, and 4 disputed in between. You are looking at an extreme disconnect in our states against each other. And when you throw that suit out, you are telling them, we won't even hear what you have to say. Now, at the very least, if they took that suit up, then you'd have people feeling like at least their arguments were heard. Now they feel like no matter what we do, no matter what we say, you won't even pay attention to what our arguments are. Procedural dismissal of these suits. And if people feel like they don't have the ability to speak up to challenge what's going on, and they feel powerless and backed into a corner, well, then people are going to strike back. And that's when things start getting spicy. From Breitbart, MSNBC's Jason Johnson predicts wave of violence after Trump leaves office. MSNBC political analyst Jason Johnson predicted Friday on Deadline that violence over Donald Trump losing the White House would increase. Johnson said, "This is just the beginning of how this is going to be. Senator Tuberville, he abandoned Texas Tech. He leaves everything but not Trumpism. He abandoned 3 different colleges, but he's not abandoning Trumpism. You have Proud Boys who are marching through Washington, D.C. and tearing down signs. The moment that Donald Trump is out of power, these groups will become more unhinged. The Republican Party is full of individuals, even if they don't believe the things at the core, are willing to placate and play with and galvanize these kinds of organizations." He continued, "I think we're heading into an even darker period. Because if you don't have somebody at the head of this sort of collection of ants running in and out of this insane anthill of MAGA and nonsense of white nationalism, if there's no one to control them, if Donald Trump doesn't have anybody around him to say, hey, look, this is a good idea or a bad idea, they will only get worse. He'll sit and stew and watch television every day and think about the fact he's not on Saturday Night Live anymore. Think about the fact that nobody cares about him, and that will enrage him and other people supporting him. So yeah, I think the Republican Party is in for real soul searching. But right now, a lot of them are still committed to Donald Trump. And the violence we're going to see in the coming months will make this past summer look like a picnic. I'm not happy about that. I'm not enthusiastic about that. But that's what I see happening. And the violence we're seeing in the streets right now is just a preview. He added, "We're talking Portland. We're talking the Midwest, and these people are empowered every single minute of every single day that they hear senators deny the legitimacy of Joe Biden getting into office. They're not being crushed down. They are being empowered. Look at the 2 people running for the January 5th runoff. They are encouraging this kind of behavior. This is not the end. It is the beginning. And that, my friends, is why there is a strike right down the middle of this country, a fissure splitting us into 2 distinct universes. One, where for years, with impunity, far leftists and Antifa who have rejected the legitimacy of Trump beat people, bashed them over the head. And in a couple instances, we have dead people. It has happened. And there has been conflict and clashes between the 2 different factions. But to see MSNBC claim it's the Proud Boys, they're the ones being emboldened after one night where they went around in D.C., but for years, I've watched the videos of Antifa. For years, I have been on the ground witnessing them beating people, knocking elderly people to the ground, setting their hats on fire, brutally beating these people. There is no uniting these 2 groups, and there is nothing but anger and rage between them. If Donald Trump is out of power, they say, whether it's January 6th or the months after, they expect violence. I will tell you one thing. The big difference between Antifa and the Proud Boys that morons like these individuals on MSNBC don't understand is that the Proud Boys don't do things at random. They actually are more centralized and hierarchical, unlike Antifa. Antifa's violence is hard to control, random violent anger. The Proud Boys and other right-wing groups and militias take specific action for specific reasons. The violence we will see coming after Donald Trump leaves, it's not going to be Proud Boys going rabble down the street. A little bit, sure. The increase in violence is going to be controlled and strategic violence from groups who are looking to gain certain things to accomplish certain goals. I'll give you an example. In Portland, we see the autonomous zones. Groups surround a few blocks, take it over, put up barricades and booby traps. What's their goal? Some kind of nebulous autonomy and anti-eviction. In a small town called Mossy Brook, where the mayor said we will not be engaging in this lockdown, their goal was very simple. They're just going to keep their businesses open. There was no hard occupation. It was just them saying, we defy. And Patriot Prayer showed up to support them. I believe the violence you will end up seeing is more likely going to be right-wing groups setting up checkpoints around their counties or small towns saying, we do not recognize the mandates from an illegitimate president. And if violence ends up actually breaking out from this, that will be the root of it. Some federal law enforcement officer or CDC official saying we must quarantine. They're already reporting a new strain of COVID in the UK, 70% more infectious. Time to lock down. Christmas is canceled. How many small towns are going to say Christmas is not canceled? How many small towns are going to call up any able-bodied man to defend their homes? And then how many of these towns might get choked out when the roads get shut down by federal authorities? That's the kind of thing you should be worried about from the right. Not to say it'll actually happen, but that's what the right would be more likely to do. I mean, we're talking about actual veterans with actual skills who were trained by this government and fought in the Middle East and know exactly how to do these jobs. The funny thing is, I've seen comments from these Trump supporters, especially as they're mocking and insulting me, mind you, saying that while I may be a coward, I certainly don't think that's the case, but they say they're not. They have dealt with, as veterans, actual combat in the deserts of the Middle East. And they would love, they say, to be walking down the street of American cities, grabbing Taco Bell on the way home after the conflict. I don't think it'll be that pristine or pretty that you could actually do that to a certain degree, but they're more than anxious to post online. They are ready, willing, and able. Now, what about the left? What's going on with the left? Well, they're certainly ready to burst. So we may see mass destabilization in major cities because the far left is ready to snap, kind of ignorantly unaware that the Democratic governors' lockdowns have destroyed everything. For some reason, they still support it. They're just angry they're not being given money. Take a look at this story from The Independent. Mass eviction fears as 12 million will owe $6,000 in unpaid rent and bills by January. The tidal wave is coming, says lawyer Charlie Herrick from December 9th, about 10 days ago. And he's right. Mass evictions in these cities and other places, but mainly centralized in these cities where there's very dense urban population. What do you think these people are going to do? Do you think they'll cease to exist? Do you think they'll be like, oh no, I couldn't pay my rent, and then just vanish into thin air? Kind of like Back to the Future? No, they're going to say, I can't pay my rent, and it's your fault, to the governors, to the mayors, to the police chiefs. And they'll go out and they'll riot. And when that happens, and these other right-wing groups are saying, y'all locked down, we got nothing to do with it. Do you think the right-wing groups are then going to come out in defense of the police in New York City after these police broke their oath to the Constitution and destroyed the lives of innocent working-class individuals? I don't think so. It's at a point like that you truly see what some kind of civil war or conflict will be. The ignorant say, there's not going to be a Mason-Dixon line like Bill Maher said. The Mason-Dixon line would go through Nana's kitchen. Okay, Bill, perhaps you should read about actual civil conflict, fourth and fifth generational warfare, and what's actually going on instead of just phoning it in. Because I'll tell you what you might see. You're not going to see Antifa storming into Mossy Brook, Washington. Why? They don't live there. They don't know the people there, and they're not going to be fighting over what is there. And why would the residents of Mossy Brook storm into Portland? They don't know who, they're not concerned about the resources there or Amazon or anything like that. They don't care about the autonomous zone. If anything, it will just be disparate cells popping up of people who say, enough. You are not legitimate to me. I made this tweet. The left, the establishment Democrat left were like, look at this guy and his hot takes. I said, Antifa does not view the U.S. government as legitimate. What happens when you add 74 million people to that number? It's not going to be a massive pro-Trump army marching in the streets wearing American flags and taking orders from Trump. It's going to be disparate cells of different militias, different right-wing groups, and they're going to say, leave me alone. Well, that's the start of it, at least. I don't know where it goes after that or if it'll even get to that point. But if Trump really does refuse to back down at every turn, then what could possibly happen? Okay, let's play normalcy bias. Let's just talk about normalcy. Maybe it's all bluster. It's just Trump is saying stuff and his supporters are saying, oh, yeah, and then really they're just going to go home and do nothing. Maybe. I kind of have that normalcy bias. And I thought to myself, there's optimism bias and normalcy bias. Normalcy bias is it can't happen here. Optimism bias is very, very similar, but where you just assume only the good things are likely to happen. In which case I'm like, everything's going to be fine, optimism, and it can't happen here, normalcy. But let me ask you, if that was the case, are we in a normal period right now? No. The economy has been shut down. The Constitution is being used as toilet paper by the Democratic governors in multiple states. So no, there's no normalcy and nothing to be optimistic about. Even though they're saying we have multiple vaccines on the horizon and 100,000+ have already been vaccinated, they're still saying we don't know how effective it will be at preventing the transmission of COVID and if it's going to stop people from getting it. People's property has been taken from them. Their pursuit of happiness has been crushed. Their rights as citizens thrown in the gutter as the Constitution is being used as toilet paper. And their actual lives are at risk. This is a recipe for revolution. So call it civil war. Call it what you want. Call it Donald Trump saying, hey, everybody, come on down to a January 6th protest. Gonna be wild when they count the votes. Again, it could all be bluster, boastfulness, braggart saying, I'm tough, I'll fight, I'll do what I gotta do. I really don't think so. Listen, you have a Second Amendment right to bear arms, right? But clearly, we had a story my buddy Luke was telling me about the other day where a woman in New York City who has airsoft guns was charged with having having illegal firearms because they resemble firearms. That's it. She didn't even have real guns, and they're trying to give her 25 years in prison. Your constitutional rights have been trampled all over in many of these places for a long time. And there's a quote that I'll paraphrase Thomas Sowell, something to the effect of, the Constitution defends you, but only if you defend the Constitution. And right now, in New York, it's not being defended. You know, for a while, I've said the system was working. The courts have worked. The Supreme Court has ruled and defended religious liberties and the right to worship. I believe it was Gorsuch who said, in no reality are you allowed to have nail salons open, but churches shut down. The First Amendment guarantees your right to gather and worship. Yet Cuomo in New York says, I don't care. He recently banned hate symbols being sold or displayed on state property. A clear violation of First Amendment rights. And he said, yeah, well, it probably does violate the Constitution. We'll figure it out. And here we are. We're at a point where left and the right clearly don't like each other, but for different reasons are ready to burn it all to the ground, figuratively and kind of in a scary way, literally. The left is saying $600 is not enough. And we're seeing today, general strike is trending. Now listen, general strike. What does that even mean right now? The left is calling for a general strike, okay? Which basically means everybody stop working, right? In normal circumstances, a general strike can be effective. The economy grinds to a halt. There's no tax revenue. And it creates a serious problem for the elites, both political and business elites. And just general, elites, wealthy families, etc. But right now, nobody's working. A general strike doesn't do anything. But at least it shows the left is getting angry and they're already the ones who want to be violent. So now they're organizing as well. And you mix it all up into a nice little pot, stir it all up, and what do you get? You get chaos. I saw this. It was also trending. December 18th, 5:36 p.m. from Ann Telnius. All the Republican rats from the Washington Post. All of the state attorneys general and U.S. Congress members who collaborated with President Trump in his attempt to subvert the Constitution and stay in office. This is what makes Republicans say enough. Not all the Republican politicians, just these ones and the Trump supporters. There's a story from Newsweek I covered earlier that said the Republican Party, it's Trump. Trump is the one who gets the donations, not the Republicans. So we've talked about a MAGA party or a Patriot party or some kind of party for Donald Trump. It's it. The Republicans, they're done. Mitch McConnell, Republicans don't like him. for the most part. Trump supporters who are making up the dominant Republican faction, 90+%, are giving their money to Trump, not the Republicans. Without him, the Republicans have nothing. In the Washington Post, they show all of these people as rats with their names near them, the different states they're from, their names, the representatives, David LaHood, Rep. Tim Walberg, all drawn as rats. It actually is just a bunch of different rats with their names next to them. You have Rep. Matt Gaetz, he's got a cool little haircut, and you got Rep. Louis Gohmert, he's got a long, broken nose, I guess. And that's it. It's just a bunch of picture of rats. But this is the kind of dehumanization that results in actual civil war. Between who? The Washington Post represents Amazon, Jeff Bezos, the corporate elites, the banksters, and the Democratic Party. It doesn't represent the progressive populist left. The progressive populist left makes up just shy of half of the Democratic base. I don't think they care all that much about this, but there is an overlap between the progressive left and the establishment Democrat left. With things like the Young Turks, for instance, they overlap very well between the two and act as a kind of pseudo false progressivism. You want to talk about who's actually a populist progressive, you look at someone like Jimmy Dore. See, Jimmy Dore and I can agree on most of the important issues and then disagree on solving the problem. Jimmy Dore would say Medicare for all. I would argue I don't know if it's economically feasible right now, and he'd probably call me an enlightened centrist, but we would agree with the main problem of the wealthy establishment elites siphoning off the wealth of the working class people. We would sit down and agree we need to fight for the people to protect their rights and their ability to support themselves. And be it a stimulus package or ending the lockdown, something must be done to save these families. I believe Jimmy would probably be more in favor of a stimulus package, and I'd be more in favor of ending the lockdown, but kind of a little bit of both. I think there's room for some kind of stimulus. My fear is hyperinflation and the mass printing of money. That's the kind of actual populist alignment we should be seeing. We're not right now, but maybe we will. MSNBC is terrified about what happens after Trump leaves. Why? It won't just be angry right-wingers. It's going to be the populists in general all saying F the establishment. Joe Biden will likely be the most despised president in American history. He's going to be considered weak and feckless, much like James Buchanan just before the Civil War. But also you have 40 to 50% of the Democratic Party, the progressives, who don't want Biden, but they thought he was better than Trump. And you've got almost every single Republican who doesn't like Joe Biden because he's the crony establishment capitalist, Well, no, that's the left. Sorry. He's the crony establishment corporatist is what I meant to say. He doesn't represent true capitalism and free markets. He represents crony capitalism. And to the left, he still represents capitalism. But in the end, you may actually see something like we saw before with Antifa and the Boogaloo Boys shaking hands. In a famous viral video, I believe it was Ford Fisher who filmed it, journalist. You see one Antifa guy shake the hand of a Boogaloo Boy saying, "You stood with us today and we thank you for that." The Boogaloo Boy said, "We agree, we're anarchists and we don't like the government either." Antifa says, okay. They mostly agree on the problems of the establishment. They disagree on the kind of government or system, economic system they would want after the fact. But that's secondary. First and foremost is the anger towards the machine. And that's what I think is coming. What it culminates in, I don't know. And I will tell you this. I can't see the future, and it may just be nothing. But I don't know if it makes sense to have a normalcy bias in a time when everything is unprecedented and it is far from normal. I guess we can only wait till January 6th to see, do Trump supporters have the political willpower to come out to D.C., to spend that money to fly? Because I tell you this, when Trump got inaugurated, the answer was no. Now, Trump supporters can deny it, but most people didn't go to D.C. And maybe it just didn't matter all that much. Trump won. Why come out? He won. Congratulations. They showed up for the vote. That's what mattered. Well, now this is what matters. Are they going to show up in person on this very important day? We'll see. The next segment is coming up tomorrow at 10 a.m. over at youtube.com/TimCastNews. Thanks for hanging out, and I will see you all then.